President of the United States. His exact words preserved in every transcript, every clip, every historical record. I am directing the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, to resign his position effective immediately. He has failed Canada. He has failed the relationship. And he has failed the people of both nations. He is to step down and allow someone who is willing to work constructively with the United States to take his place. This is not a suggestion. Canada's leadership is a matter of American national security, and I am exercising my authority to address it. The language was not diplomatic. It was not conditional. It was not framed as an opinion or a preference or a recommendation. It was the language of a CEO terminating an employee. I am directing. He is to step down. I am exercising my authority. Applied to the leader of a sovereign nation that has existed as an independent democracy for 158 years. The framing told the world everything it needed to know about the mental model operating inside the White House. Allied leaders are subordinates. Allied democracies are divisions of a parent company. And the president's authority extends not just to American citizens and American institutions, but to the governance of foreign nations whose policies he finds inconvenient. What followed in the next 72 hours was not the response the White House anticipated. There was no resignation, no apology, no quiet back-channel plea for forgiveness. Instead, there was a sequence of retaliatory actions so swift, so comprehensive, and so personally devastating that it has permanently altered the architecture of the Western alliance. Carney did not issue a measured statement of sovereignty. He did not deploy the cold, analytical, surgically precise composure that had become his trademark over 18 months of confrontation. He struck back. And he did so in a way that answered a question no Allied leader had dared to ask for generations. What happens if we simply say no? First, within hours of Trump's address, the Canadian Parliament convened an emergency session. By unanimous vote, 338-0, it passed a constitutional sovereignty amendment enshrining in the supreme law of Canada that no foreign government, no foreign leader, and no foreign institution may interfere in Canadian democratic processes. The amendment included automatic economic sanctions triggered by any future attempt at such interference, permanent, irreversible, carved into the legal foundation of the nation, not a resolution, a constitutional lock. Second, Canada launched a formal international investigation into the Trump Organization's financial dealings in Canadian jurisdictions. Working in partnership with international financial regulatory authorities, Canadian prosecutors froze every Trump-associated asset on Canadian soil, real estate holdings, licensing agreements, financial instruments, and associated corporate entities. The estimated value? More than $600 million concentrated in Toronto and Vancouver. The legal mechanism was carefully chosen. Operating under Canadian law, with international partners, it is entirely beyond the reach of American executive privilege, presidential pardons, or Department of Justice intervention. The president cannot stop it, he cannot limit it, he cannot classify it, and he cannot pardon anyone who might be implicated. Third, Canada announced the formation of the Democratic Sovereignty Compact. The founding signatories read like a roll call of the world's most stable democracies: the European Union, the United Kingdom, Japan, Australia, South Korea, India, New Zealand, Switzerland, Norway, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, and Colombia. Within a week, Singapore, Chile, Uruguay, and Finland would join. 17 nations representing 4.6 billion people and more than half of global GDP, united by a single principle: democratic sovereignty is inviolable. Citizens choose their own leaders. And any government, regardless of its size, its military, its economy, or its president, that attempts to override that principle will face the collective economic and diplomatic response of every other democracy pledged to defend it. The compact was explicitly designed as a framework for democracies to defend each other from the United States. Fourth, Canada formally initiated a comprehensive review of its participation in every U.S.-led alliance structure, including NATO, NORAD, and the Five Eyes Intelligence Partnership. The language was precise, not a withdrawal, a review, but the signal was unmistakable. If the alliance is a partnership of sovereign equals, Canada stays. If the alliance is a hierarchy with America at the top, giving orders, and allies at the bottom obeying them, Canada leaves. And the distinction between those two interpretations would be determined by whether the President of the United States has the power to order allied leaders to resign. The review would determine whether any alliance built on that claim is worth belonging to. But it was Carney's words that transformed this from a diplomatic crisis into a global reckoning. Standing before a joint session of Parliament, looking directly into the camera with the controlled intensity of a man whose democratic mandate had been attacked by a foreign government, he spoke 16 words that are now on every front page in the democratic world. You tried to fire me. You don't have that power. You never did. And after today, the whole world knows it. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Every member of Parliament, both chambers, political opponents who had spent careers trying to defeat Carney, on their feet, applauding not the politician, but the answer. The answer to the question every democracy on earth had been waiting for someone to give. What happens when the United States orders a democratic leader to resign? Nothing. The order has no force. The leader stays. The democracy stands. And the person who gave the order is diminished, not by the refusal, but by the revelation that the authority he claimed was an illusion. The phrase, "You tried to fire me," was trending in 61 countries within 11 minutes. It was the top story on every news network in the English, French, Spanish, German, Japanese, Hindi, and Mandarin-speaking world simultaneously. A political scientist at Sciences Po in Paris called it the 16 words that ended the American century. Not because America lost its power, but because the world learned it was never as absolute as everyone assumed. Behind the scenes, the decision to escalate from demand to order, a distinction that multiple senior White House officials reportedly argued against, was driven by a psychological dynamic that sources inside the administration described with unusual candor. Trump had been outmaneuvered by Carney at every stage of their confrontation. The tariff countermoves, the energy suspension, the capital flight, the dollar clearing crisis. Each round produced a Canadian response more devastating than the American provocation, and each round elevated Carney's international standing while diminishing Trump's. The order was not a strategic calculation, it was a psychological one. 3 people in the room during the drafting of the statement told reporters independently the same thing. The president wanted to end this by asserting dominance so absolute that Carney would have no option but to comply or be seen as defying the most powerful person on earth. He believed, genuinely believed, that the framing of a direct order would create a binary that favored him. Either Carney resigned, confirming American authority, or Carney refused and was weakened by the perception of a foreign leader in open defiance of the United States. What the president did not consider, what no one in the room apparently raised, was the third possibility, that Carney would refuse and be strengthened by it, and that is precisely what happened. The international reaction was immediate, universal, and more severe than anything the previous 18 months of confrontation had produced. The United Nations Secretary General issued a formal statement within 4 hours. Not the usual expression of concern, but a direct citation of Article 2, Paragraph 7 of the UN Charter prohibiting interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states, followed by the sentence, "No head of state possesses the authority to order the removal of another head of state elected through democratic processes." The European Parliament convened an emergency session and passed a resolution by a vote of 602 to 9 condemning what it called an explicit and unprecedented assertion of imperial authority over a fellow democracy. France's president called it the most dangerous statement issued by a Western leader since the end of the Cold War. Germany's chancellor said, "If the president of the United States believes he can order the Prime Minister of Canada to resign, he believes he can order any of us to resign. That belief is incompatible with the existence of the Western Alliance as a partnership of sovereign nations." The British Prime Minister, in the most direct language used by a UK leader about an American president since Suez, said, "No ally orders another ally's leader to resign. That is not the language of alliance, that is the language of empire." The word empire appeared in 11 separate official statements from allied governments within the first 48 hours. It appeared because it was precise, the language of the order, I am directing, I am exercising my authority, is structurally identical to the language colonial powers used when installing and removing leaders in territories they controlled. International relations scholars from Oxford, the Sorbonne, and Georgetown published a joint statement identifying the order as the first explicit assertion by an American president that the United States possesses governing authority over an allied democracy, a claim that, if accepted, would retroactively transform every Western alliance from a partnership of equals into a hierarchy of subordination. The comparison to imperial history was not hyperbolic, it was descriptive. And the fact that it was descriptive, that the most precise word for what Trump had done was imperial, was itself the most damaging dimension of the crisis, because it forced every ally to confront a question that polite diplomacy had been avoiding for years. Is the United States an ally or a suzerain? Then came the silence. For 48 hours after the order, Carney said nothing publicly. No press conference, no parliamentary statement, no diplomatic communication to the White House, no social media response, no leaked quotes from unnamed officials. Nothing. The silence was total, deliberate, and strategically excruciating for the White House, which had expected either rapid capitulation or rapid defiance, either of which could be responded to, spun, managed. Silence could not be managed. Silence could not be countered. Silence forced the White House to sit with the order hanging in the air, unchallenged and unanswered, while international condemnation accumulated and the American media cycle, which requires a response to sustain a story, began filling the void with analysis, criticism, and historical comparisons that were uniformly devastating for the administration. What was actually happening during those 48 hours was the assembly and finalization of the most comprehensive retaliatory package any allied nation has ever prepared against the United States. Carney's inner circle, a group of 7 that included the foreign minister, the finance minister, the defense minister, the attorney general, and 3 senior national security advisors, had been developing response contingencies for an explicit sovereignty violation for over a year. They had updated them as each previous escalation brought the confrontation closer to this exact scenario. The order to resign was the trigger they had designated as the threshold for maximum response. The provocation so extreme that it justified not just proportional retaliation, but the disproportionate restructuring of the entire bilateral and multilateral relationship. Carney's instruction to the group, delivered within an hour of Trump's statement, was 11 words. He crossed the last line. Everything we built goes live now. Warren Buffett, watching from Omaha, put his finger on the structural paradox that explains why this moment will outlast both leaders. In a rare public statement, the billionaire investor said Trump had just done the one thing that destroys authority permanently. He stated his power out loud, issued an explicit command, and the person he aimed it at proved that the power didn't exist, had never existed, and could never be reclaimed once its absence was publicly demonstrated. Buffett explained that implied power is unlimited because it has never been defined. The moment you state your power, the moment you say, I am ordering or I have the authority to, you have drawn a line around it. You have given it a shape. You have made it specific. And the person you aimed it at can now look at that shape and ask a question that was previously unanswerable. Is this real? Can you actually do what you're claiming? And if you can't, if the order is given and not obeyed, if the authority is claimed and not confirmed, then the power doesn't just fail in this instance. It fails universally. Because everyone who was watching just learned something they can never unlearn. The power was a bluff. Buffett placed it in the context of a boardroom. I have watched CEOs destroy their own authority in exactly this way. A CEO who is feared is powerful because nobody knows the limits of what they might do. The implied threat of termination, of demotion, of marginalization, that threat keeps people in line because it is undefined. It could be anything. But the moment a CEO publicly fires someone and the board overrides the termination, the moment the stated power is publicly defied and the defiance sticks, the CEO is finished. Not because they lost one fight, but because everyone in the organization just watched the ceiling of their authority get measured and found to be lower than anyone assumed. Every future interaction happens in the shadow of that measurement. Every future order carries the unspoken asterisk. But can they actually enforce this? And the answer, once demonstrated publicly, is always, maybe not. His closing words on the subject were 11 delivered with the finality of a theorem that has been proven and can never be disproven. He tested his own power, it failed, and now everyone knows. The consequences cascaded not just across the U.S.-Canada relationship, but across the entire architecture of Western alliances. The Democratic Sovereignty Compact gained 4 additional signatories within its first week, bringing the total to 17 nations. Each signature was not just an endorsement of the Compact's principles. Each signature was a statement, visible, permanent, and directed at Washington, that said, "We watched what happened to Canada. We watched the order fail, and we are formally declaring that no American president will ever give us that order without facing collective consequences." The compact was not a response to Trump's order. It was the permanent institutional infrastructure that the order made necessary. And like every institution Carney had built during this crisis, it would outlast both leaders, both presidencies, and both political careers. The Trump Organization investigation produced its first public consequence within 10 days, a formal document preservation order issued to every Trump-affiliated entity operating in Canadian jurisdictions. The legal instrument required the preservation of all financial records, communications, transaction histories, and corporate governance documents under penalty of criminal contempt. The order covered 14 entities across Toronto and Vancouver with combined assessed asset values of more than $600 million. American legal experts noted that the investigation, because it was conducted under Canadian law by Canadian authorities in partnership with international regulatory bodies, was entirely beyond the reach of American executive privilege, presidential pardons, or Department of Justice intervention. The president could not stop it, could not limit it, could not classify it, and could not pardon anyone who might be implicated by it. The personal strike was not just politically devastating, it was legally unblockable, and the financial exposure it represented would grow with every document request, every regulatory filing, and every international cooperation agreement that Canadian investigators executed. American domestic politics fractured along lines that the order itself had created. The demand that every Republican answer a question with no safe answer, does the President of the United States have the authority to order a foreign Democratic leader to resign, produced a cascade of silence and breaks. Answering yes meant endorsing a claim of imperial authority that would alienate moderate voters, independent voters, and any voter who values democratic sovereignty as a principle. Answering no meant publicly disagreeing with the president on the most visible, most discussed, most internationally covered statement he had ever made. 17 Republican senators chose to remain silent, a silence that was itself interpreted as dissent, and that left them vulnerable from both sides. 3 Republican senators broke publicly. One called the order fundamentally incompatible with American values. Another said, "We do not have the authority to hire or fire the leaders of allied nations, and claiming otherwise embarrasses every American who understands what democracy means." A third, a senior member of the Foreign Relations Committee, said simply, "This is not who we are." The international dimension, however, will prove the most permanently consequential, because the order and its public failure answered a question that had been holding the Western alliance together through implication for 80 years. Does America lead the alliance through authority or through legitimacy? Authority means America commands and allies obey. Legitimacy means America proposes and allies agree because the proposals serve mutual interests. The distinction had never been tested because no president had ever claimed authority explicitly enough to force the test. Trump claimed it. Carney tested it. The answer was clear. Allies do not obey American commands. The authority is a fiction. The only thing holding the alliance together is legitimacy, the perception that American leadership serves everyone's interests, not just America's. And the order, by revealing the authority as fiction, forced every ally to evaluate that legitimacy on its own merits, without the cushion of implied power that had previously supplemented it. That evaluation, conducted simultaneously by every allied government in the wake of the order's failure, was not producing results favorable to Washington. So here is where we stand. The President of the United States publicly ordered the Prime Minister of Canada to resign. Not demanded, not suggested, not requested, ordered, using the language of command, claiming the authority of a superior over a subordinate, asserting that democratic leadership in an allied nation operates at American pleasure. Carney struck back with a constitutional sovereignty amendment passed unanimously by Parliament, a formal investigation into the Trump Organization's Canadian business dealings, with every associated asset frozen. The formation of a democratic sovereignty compact with 17 allied nations, pledging mutual defense against any interference in democratic processes, and a formal review of Canadian participation in every U.S.-led alliance structure. He stood before Parliament, looked into the camera, and said 16 words that are now on every front page in the democratic world. You tried to fire me. You don't have that power. You never did. And after today, the whole world knows it. Buffett explained why the order destroyed Trump's authority instead of Carney's position with the clarity of someone who has watched the identical mistake destroy CEOs, boards, and institutions for 7 decades. Implied power is infinite because it is never tested. Stated power is fragile because it can be defied. And public defiance that succeeds, defiance that is not punished, not reversed, not overcome, doesn't just defeat the person who gave the order. It inoculates everyone who watched against every future order. The question, what happens if I refuse, has been answered publicly permanently. The answer, that nothing happens, that the order has no force, that the authority was never real, cannot be erased from the memory of any leader who saw it. Trump tried to end Carney's career. Instead, he defined it, gave it the moment, the quote, the cause, and the legacy that will be remembered long after both men leave office. He tried to prove that American power could override democratic sovereignty. Instead, he proved that it can't. Not because anyone stopped him with force, but because the order was given and nothing happened. And that nothing, that silence where compliance was supposed to be, that absence where submission was expected, that empty space where a resignation letter should have appeared and didn't, is the sound of imperial authority ending. Not with a war, not with a revolution, with a prime minister who simply said no, meant it, and was still standing the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning since. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.